These are, I mentioned last week, some of these lessons and prophets overlap what we've read in 2 Kings. And this one, I think this is chapter 24 there in 2 Kings that we kind of looked at. And then next week we'll talk about, who's next? I think Habakkuk, and then I'm going to try to get through Jeremiah in one lesson. But they were prophets who prophesied during the area of 2 Kings 25. So that's kind of the reason that we're looking at some of these prophets and the message that they bring. So question number one, again, just kind of a think about it question or, general discussion. And that is, have you ever heard something that you believed to be impossible or an impossibility and it turned out to be true? Anybody ever been in that situation before?
The passage of time in our lives.
Okay.
How it quickly goes faster as you get older. I've heard that all my life.
Yeah.
And it's true.
Yeah, I can remember when, I was a kid and you hear some guy who's 80-some years old say, boy, it goes by fast. You think 80-some years, go by fast? Impossible, right? But it does, doesn't it? I mean, it just, life is something that is so brief. Seems like a long time when you're young, but doesn't take long to be old and look back. Have you ever heard something about a person that you thought, that's not right? That can't be true. That turns out to be true? I think probably all of us have been in that situation before. What if I were to tell you this, though? And you just be honest with me and tell me what you think. What if I told you that in 50 years, the United States wouldn't exist anymore? Would you believe it?
Yeah.
Okay. Would there be some people who wouldn't believe it? Yeah. And why do you think that'd be? Why would somebody not believe that, maybe?
That thing for 10-foot tall bulletproof.
Yeah. Goes back to power, to we're the most powerful nation, on the face of the earth. We're the richest nation. Nothing's going to happen to us. But that was the message that Nahum was preaching to Assyria. And we don't really know the exact date of the book of Nahum. We can kind of get a general time frame from reading the book. We know that the city of Thebes, the Egyptian city of Thebes, had been conquered. And that happened sometime in the 660s before Christ, obviously. And we know that Assyria hadn't yet been conquered, and that happened in about 612. So if you kind of do the math, you've got maybe roughly 50 years in there. It could have been shorter than that Nahum talked about the fact that this world empire, this great and powerful nation, wasn't even going to exist anymore. And so when you think about the book of Nahum, that's kind of the message that we think about. Go ahead, brother.
So the Syrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, they all thought the same thing.
Yeah.
We're going to last forever. They all said that.
Yeah.
The Romans, were they 300 years?
Yeah, roughly. Roughly.
So more than us.
Yeah.
We're in the ballpark of the same numbers. But you compare to what happened to Rome and why they fell, and look at us, pretty similar.
Yeah. Well, it's the pattern of every great nation.
Yeah.
Why do they eventually fall apart? It's because evil and wickedness isn't. Decay of morality, that when you start down that hill, then you're headed in the wrong direction. But that's what you read about all these great nations, and that's eventually what happens to them. God took advantage of them. He used them. Well, I don't want to say he took advantage of them, but he used them when they were in the position and used them to do whatever he wanted to do, or get accomplished. But they were all eventually judged, and they all did eventually downfall. A couple of things before we get into the book of Nahum itself, though. Question number 2 here on your handout is, what famous prophet preached a message of destruction to Nineveh about 100 years, roughly, some people say 150, somewhere in that area, before Nahum? Yeah, it was Jonah, right? And when Jonah went and preached to Nineveh or to Assyria, I mean, that's what Nineveh was. That was the capital of Assyria there. But when he went and preached to Assyria, it seems they weren't yet at what I would call the pinnacle of their national power. They were definitely on the rise, weren't they? I mean, they were gaining momentum and they were getting bigger and bigger and stronger. But they weren't at the point that they were where Nahum is now talking to them. But it is kind of interesting to think about, because when Jonah goes and preaches to them, what question number 3 here, what was their reaction to Jonah's preaching? Yeah, what was the message of Jonah? Do you remember? How many days did they have?
40, wasn't it?
Yeah, 40 days. That's what Jonah preached. 40 days, and the city of Nineveh is going to be overthrown. So as Jonah went out and preached that message, that was, the people reacted in a positive way. Well, if you go back and you read, of course, through the book of Jonah, a couple of things that stand out to me. First of all, it says they believed. They believed that God was going to destroy that nation in 40 days if they didn't repent. And so they fasted, and remember that they put on sackcloth, and they even sat down in ashes. And how many of them did this? All of them. Right? The Bible says from the least to the greatest. And what about the king? Yeah, he made the royal proclamation, didn't he? He said, nobody's going to eat and nobody's going to drink anything. We're going to fast. And I want you to pray to God earnestly that this might not come upon us. Of course, that wasn't the only thing that they did. Did they just sit down and pray to God? What else did they do?
Well, they turned from their evil ways.
That's right. They repented, didn't they? The Bible says they turned away from their evil and they turned away from their violence. And because of that, second part of question number 3, what did that cause God to do?
He changed his mind.
Yeah. Why was God going to destroy it? Because of evil human behavior, right? So if their behavior changes, what do you think God's feeling towards them is going to be? It's going to change too, right? But it was their change in behavior that led to God sparing them. And so it is interesting to think about. There was a time when they would have listened. There was a time when they believed that judgment was going to come upon them, and they were willing to change. But when Nahum preaches this message, do they change? Nah, they didn't. They were too powerful now. They were too proud. Nothing and nobody was going to stop them now. And so they didn't change their ways at all. But it is interesting to think about how just 100 years before, how different of an attitude and people they were. But think about the United States of America. Rewind in history 100 years. What were people's attitude like? What was morality like? Lot different than it is today, wasn't it? So question number 4 here, kind of get into the book itself. How does Nahum describe the ways of the Lord? When you read about Nahum describing God, what is your feelings that he's describing here? Anger, right? He talks about vengeance in verse 2. He talks about the Lord's wrath. He talks about his anger, how he's like a whirlwind in the storm in verse 3. When people, most people, I guess I should say, when most people tend to think of God, what do you think the first thing they think about is?
Loving.
Yeah, I think it's probably the qualities that are easy to talk about and joyful to talk about. And so they think of the comforting and the pleasant aspects of the character of God. So maybe I shouldn't ask this question, but why does evil exist? Where did evil come from?
Absence of God. Absence of God.
Okay, the absence of God. Let's be more specific though.
Yeah.
Why does evil exist in the world today? Satan? Anybody else? Man. Is it God? No. It's Satan and man. Whenever God made the earth, what was it like? Perfect. Only good. Right? Where did evil come from? Satan enters into the picture, man enters into the picture, right? And then you have evil making its entrance into the world. And so evil exists today because of Satan and because of us, right? Because of humanity. And wherever evil exists, there's going to be divine feelings toward that. And eventually, of course, we know that's going to end up in judgment. But that's what Nahum is talking about, this picture of evil. Humanity is evil. Assyria is evil. And so God has these, what do you think God's feelings are going to be towards Assyria? Not going to be love and mercy and all the good things we read about, right? It's going to be wrath. It's going to be anger. And so he talks about the vengeance of God as he goes through chapter 1 here. Now, you think about a couple of things I think about God. Is it true that God is loving? Yeah, that's not wrong. Is it wrong to talk about that? Emphasize it? No. Is it true that God's merciful? Yeah. Great, full of grace? Sure. Not wrong to think about and talk about those things, but the Bible also tells us don't forget about the other side of God, right? Romans 11:22. Goodness and the severity of God. And so if we're just always dwelling on the love and the mercy and the grace of God, we're not getting the full picture, are we? We got to remember that when sin enters into the picture, then the feelings of God toward mankind change, don't they? And that's what you have here as Nahum is describing God. He's describing him as a vengeful God, as an angry God, as a God that is full of wrath. And, you know, that's a terrifying picture of God. When I think about the pictures or the stories in the Bible about God's anger and his wrath, I know this. I don't want to be on that side. Do you? I know enough about reading in the Bible when God's angry and when his wrath is poured out and divine judgment comes upon individuals or men or nations. That's not a side that any of us want to be on. And so that's what Nahum is describing here. The wrath of God, the divine judgment of God coming upon man. Go ahead.
Another thing there in verse 3, though, it says God is slow to anger. There's great power there, but he's also slow to that anger.
Yeah. And that's, to me, that's even a more scary thought. What does it take to get God angry at you? It takes a lot, but can he get angry at you?
Yes.
Yeah. And when you get somebody who's usually a patient and a loving person, when you get them angry, it's generally not I would think of their anger being twice as bad as somebody else. And that's kind of the way I think about God. You know, he is merciful, he is slow to anger, but you can do enough to get God angry at you, can't you?
You have to kind of parallel this with the father and his children and the correction, and change the ways you have to, relate a little bit.
Yeah.
How we know we're on the right track.
Sure.
So it's kind of that same.
Yeah. And I mean, generally with parents, good parents, I know there are some exceptions to the rule in our societies, but aren't we generally patient and loving and, merciful toward our children? But can they make you angry? There's a point where they cross the line and then you become angry at them. And that's kind of the picture of God in the Bible. Yeah, he is a divine being who's slow to anger, but he does get angry. And when he does, it's not a good place for anybody or anybody or any nation or individual to be. So question number 5 here. What had Nineveh done against the Lord to make him so angry?
Well, they showed no honor, one thing to him.
Okay.
They not, what happened to him. Down in verse 12, he says, I'm going to punish those who are stagnant in spirit, who say in their hearts, the Lord will not be good or evil. And I read from American Standard, but, sometimes it's just taking advantage of the good side of God and not realizing the things he's done for them.
Yeah. And I mean, basically, when you read about them there, it says they plot evil against the Lord. They were just doing everything the Lord told them not to do, right? And that was kind of the lifestyle that they were living. But it's also kind of interesting, I think, too. If you look in I don't have my glasses on. I can't see very well here, but some people think of this idea that they come up with this evil plan, this future plan that they were going to go conquer Judah and Jerusalem. And that could very well be, but remember that Assyria tried to conquer Judah and Jerusalem once, hadn't it? What happened? God miraculously intervened. Remember when he sent the angel into the camp, killed all the people, and they decide this may not be the best idea. They pack up and go home. And so some people believe that it's a specific reference to an evil plot that they've come up with to conquer, and God says, you're not going to do it. You're not going to conquer my people. But, we do know that basically, I think back to the days of the flood. What did people think about constantly? Evil. That was all that went through their mind. All their plans revolved around evil and wicked things. And I think that's a pretty good description of Nineveh too. So basically everything that God told them not to do is what they were doing, plotting evil things. What question 6 here, how would Nineveh's fate affect Judah? How does Nahum describe Judah after what's going to happen to Nineveh or Assyria? Yeah. As far as the Assyrians were concerned, though, Judah wouldn't have to worry about them anymore. God was going to take care of them. When he took care of them, that was going to be the end of them. And so he talks about how that would liberate them, free them up to worship God. And that's really the message of the Bible. You think about God and his people. God is going to liberate his people. And happened in Egyptian bondage, didn't it? Happened in captivity too, but happens for us today when it comes to Satan and sin. But they wouldn't have to worry about Assyrian threat anymore. Question number 7 here. So as you go into chapter 2, you kind of read about the destruction of Nineveh. And, Nahum it's as he can see the battle being waged, literally happening in front of him. He's writing about the things that are going to happen. And there's an amazing detailed prophecy that Nahum writes about concerning the way that Nineveh, the city of Nineveh, was going to be destroyed. You'll find that in chapter 2 and verse 6. And what is that prophecy?
The gates of the river shall be opened, and the palace shall be dissolved.
Yeah. So as Nahum pictures this destruction of Nineveh and Assyria, he sees gates, he sees a river, and he sees destruction taking place because of that. So historically, if you go back and you study, the battle against Nineveh and how Nineveh was destroyed, there's some debate between people as to, what you should believe or what you shouldn't. But here's some things that we do know for sure. Nineveh had river gates, didn't they? And one of the reasons that they had river gates is they had a way to let water into the city, and they had a way to let water out of the city. But they also used it as a defense mechanism. They had a big moat around the wall, and if an enemy came to attack them, they could open the gates and literally fill that moat up with water, where you can imagine if you were trying to attack that city, first you got to get through water, and then you got to get to the wall. So it would have been a way to kind of impede and discourage an attack against them. Now, how did that exactly happen? Well, I don't know for sure. I think basically there's probably two ideas. One idea is that, the river, the waters were so flooded that they had to open the gates and let the water through, or else it was going to tear the walls down. And when they opened the gates for the river, that the enemy used that and snuck through. That's one theory. The other theory is that the enemy literally dammed up the river and built up the waters to such an extent, and then they broke the dam and let the waters rush and hit the city and the wall, and that's the way that they broke through. But it is interesting to read here. And again, go back and historically read about some of those things. That river led to the destruction of that city. And Nahum saw that, he prophesied about it, 50 years before it happened. So one of those amazing prophecies within the Bible that, again, point to the idea, how could he have known that? How could he have known? Everybody thought that the city of Nineveh was indestructible. They thought that all the things that they had built, were foolproof. All the defenses that they had in place wasn't any way that anybody was going to be able to conquer that city or that nation.
That's very similar to what happened with Babylon, right?
Yep. All these nations. I mean, you look at them. It's not that they became weak. It was in the height of their power that these people come in and just take over.
But even with the river, whether it be dammed up or a trench being drawn to get in, because Babylon was the same type of city, fortified with the moat and all of that.
Yeah, it's again, take some time, do a little bit of research or reading about them. Just amazing when you think about, the foreknowledge of God. And the idea, first of all, that this great nation in 50 years wasn't going to even exist, but even beyond that, how they were going to get conquered, how the city was going to fall. So let's see here what we got next. Question number 8, how does Nahum characterize Nineveh's immediate future?
It's not good.
Yeah, not good at all, right? When you read about it there, and beginning in about verse 7, she's going to be led away captive. There's just a lot of stuff that's going to happen to them. You have to remember this. This wasn't just another war that was being waged here upon this earth. This was divine punishment that was coming upon a national empire's atrocities. And so when God brings judgment upon a nation, it's judgment, isn't it? Not just a couple of punches thrown here and there, but it was a picture of utter destruction. It's a reminder to me, though, when I think about this, the frailty of even the greatest of human inventions. Sometimes, probably all the time, humans come up with these great inventions and these ideas, and they think that it's foolproof. We get proud and we get arrogant, and one of the things that came to my mind was the Titanic. And I don't know, some people have debated as to whether a man actually said even God himself couldn't sink this ship. But when they built the Titanic, people thought, this is it. This is a foolproof ship. Nothing and nobody's going to be able to touch it. And even the greatest of human inventions, listen, as great as a city and as good of a defense as Nineveh had, it's not going to last if God comes against it. There's nothing that anybody can build or do to stop the judgment of God. And that was the message of Nahum. God's judgment is coming. You can't do a thing to fight against it. And you're going to be utterly destroyed because of it. Question number 9, we talked about this a little bit in general. So why did God judge Nineveh? Nahum kind of goes into more of a detailed explanation here in chapter 3.
He calls it a bloody city full of lies and robbery, slayings, carcasses laying around, corpse laying around, wasteland.
Yeah. They were, when you study about the Assyrians and a lot of these world empires, but they were ruthless when it came to bloodshed. And they didn't care how old or how young you were. They didn't care if you were a man or a woman or a child. They literally, when they would go through and conquer these areas, they would literally stack the corpses up like lumber as a sign when people would come along, don't try to resist us. Don't try to fight against us, or this is what's going to happen to you. You read about some of the things that they did in history, pretty barbaric people, weren't they? But they killed a lot of innocent people. I mean, I know they went to war and they probably killed a lot of soldiers, but they killed a lot of innocent people too. And so God's judgment was going to be brought upon them for that shedding of that innocent blood. Idolatry is another reason. Read about them there, and God kind of talks about them from the standpoint of being a prostitute. That's pretty common illustration in the Bible when it comes to idolatry, comparing it to the idea of prostitution. But one thing I think that we learn about mankind is you become like the God you worship. And so what kind of gods were they worshiping? Yeah, gods of war, right? Gods of sex, love. And they became like the gods that they were worshiping. And we all know this. Does what you believe affect your behavior?
Sure.
Yeah. And so if they believe these are the gods that they're worshiping and we want to be like them, that's what they were like. And you think about us as Christians, right? We believe in Jehovah God. Do we want to be like him? Yeah, that's our goal, isn't it? To be like him. And so they became like these gods that they worshipped. And again, idolatry was one of the reasons that led to their destruction. And not just they themselves observing it, but they conquered these nations and then they spread it. They spread it all over these nations. And so it affected the entire known world at that time, didn't it? You also read about the conquering of Thebes here. I mentioned that in the beginning as we started studying. What are some of the things when you read about the conquering of Thebes? How did Nineveh treat Thebes whenever they conquered it? Now, Thebes was an Egyptian city. Understand that. So it was one of the kind of the dominant cities of Egypt. But whenever they were able finally to kind of squash Egypt as a world power and take over in their position, what did they do to them?
Took them a bunch of away as captive.
Yeah. I mean, you read about, again, some of the things they did, but you'll read in verse, let me see here. Verse 10, her young children also were dashed to pieces at the head of every street. When they went in and they conquered Thebes, they took the babies out of the city and they smashed them to pieces in the public roads and streets. I mean, they did it in front of the people. Steve mentioned, they took the Egyptian leaders and they cast lots to see, well, whose servant is he going to be? They took the great men and they carried away and they put them into prison. And so when you read about how they treated these people, God said, what you did to these people is going to be done to you. Now, you reap what you sow. It's kind of a principle you read about in the scripture. But you think about Thebes. Nobody thought the city of Thebes could ever be conquered either. These great cities, the way that they were set up, they were genius. I mean, the way that they were set up. But it did get conquered, and nobody thought Nineveh was going to be conquered either. But, that's going to happen also. Question number 11 here. So why were Nineveh's defense efforts useless?
Well, God was against them.
Yeah. I was thinking about that idea, biblical idea, who can fight against God and win. It's not who can fight against God, because a lot of people have tried to fight against him. Who's ever beat God? No one. And Nineveh was fighting against God when God sent the Chaldeans and partly the Medes too, and sent them against them. He was fighting against the army of God. And they were not going to win that battle. Not only that, but who was going to come help Syria? Who liked Assyria? No one. Yeah, you read about what they did to the Egyptians. That's what they did everywhere they went. Nobody was going to come to their help. Nobody was going to come rescue them or give them any aid. And so you read about in question 13 here, how would the people respond to Nineveh's destruction? They were going to rejoice. They were going to be glad that nation and those people were gone. Question 12, how final would Assyria's judgment be?
Well, they would be scattered to the point that no one could ever gather them together.
Yeah. If you look in verse 19 there of chapter 3, here's the way Nahum describes it. He says, your injury has no healing. Your wound is severe. He likens it to a wounded body with no way to heal itself. The human body is an amazing thing because you can get some wounds and you can recover from those wounds, right? But there's some wounds you can't recover from. And that's what Nahum likened this to. It's like a body that's been wounded that's beyond repair. Now, it can't heal itself. So they're never going to be able to recover from this divine judgment. So here's a couple of think about questions here at the end. How do the sins of our nation compare with Nineveh's? Yeah, I was thinking about, the smashing of babies into pieces. I know we don't take babies out into the street today and smash them into pieces, but they do inside a mother's womb, don't they? Any idolatry in America today?
Full of.
Yeah, how about pride? Propensity to do evil instead of good? Yeah. I don't want to be all doom and gloom because I think there's some good qualities about America and there's some good people in America. But when you look at the direction that we're headed, that's what scares me. We're not going in the direction to be on God's favorable side. And when a nation gets to a point where God is slow to anger, he's merciful. But when you get to the point where God's wrath and anger is against you, it's a scary thing.
Well, I think in the U.S. we don't really, obviously we have similar issues, but for the general population, we don't believe that wickedness will have the same results as it did here.
Yeah, we're the exception to the rule, aren't we? But that's one of the things the Bible does teach. I know Dennis asked this question, but does God judge nations? He still judge nations. Listen, if you question that fact, go and search for Nineveh today. What do you go find? Rubble, right? But it's not just Nineveh. Where's Babylon? Where's the Greek Empire? Where's the Roman Empire?
Just little pieces left.
Just little pieces, tidbits, rubble here and there, right? And they all were judged by God, weren't they? But God does judge nations, and when God judges nations, that's the end of it. They don't recover. So question 15, what should we do in order to warn an individual or group that is in danger of God's judgment? What was Nahum's job? Tell them, right? Tell them, warn them, try to save them. And that's our job today too, isn't it? We got to tell people about the destruction of God and the judgment of God. We've got to warn them about it. We can't control how they react, but it's our job to tell them. All right, anybody got any thoughts, comments, questions about Nahum before we end?